Good afternoon, everyone, first of all. Empowerment, immersive technology, and emerging economies. 3 keywords of high importance for the future, from a human-centric approach, but also from a business approach. Let me take the liberty to introduce myself, the topic, and also our magnificent speakers today. My name is Patricia Paulina, and I'm a Strategic Regional Innovations Manager at the European Institute of Technology with the focus area of manufacturing. Geographically, we focus on the Regional Innovation Scheme, which covers countries in Southern, Central, and Eastern Europe with moderate and modest innovation capacities. In that sense, on behalf of the European Years of Skills 2023, we launched a pilot initiative, upskilling more emerging innovators and also early-stage startups in their artificial intelligence capabilities and their usage of immersive technology for a competitive advantage. And additionally, also launched the EIT Manufacturing RIS Metaverse Sphere on Spatial.io, enhancing collaboration and exploring new opportunities for the future. After that, now it is my great pleasure to invite our panelists and experts to dive into this topic and see how the vision of the future will display. Our first panelist, Elena Bascone from Women in Immersive Technology. Please join us, Elena.
Thank you.
Secondly, a figure famous in Brussels in the Web3 space, not only for competence, but also for his jokes and charm, Gianluigi Vona, a human public affairs, Web3 advisor, and also editor of Metaverse EU.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Our last panelist not only has a deep expertise in the European approach, but also contributed towards the publication on social implications of the metaverse as a project fellow in the World Economic Forum. Jennifer Bettinger, innovation consultant at Accenture. So, to kick that off, we have this big term, immersive technology, circling around, and also having the addition of artificial intelligence, the metaverse. Getting confused is probably not a circumstance which occurs unusually. In that sense, I would like to ask Elena as a start, first of all, what do you define in our context as immersive technology, and also how do you perceive the current landscape of application in emerging economies?
Yeah, so thank you very much for that question. I would like to split it into 2. So when it comes to immersive technology, I would like to give an inclusive definition, and that includes both XR, so VR, MR, and AR, but also not just the side aspect to it, but also I would like to include other senses, so audio experiences and also tactile experiences like haptic feedback, because I think that for the future, my hope is to have technology at the service of all of our 5 senses. So my definition is really about not just XR, but also other experiences like the one I mentioned that include other 2 sensors. So right now we have 3 of them. We just need like taste and smell, and hopefully in the future this is a possibility. When it comes to emerging economies, I would like to remind that the potential for Europe is by 2025 to achieve 65 billions in the XR sector. But right now, Europe is not at the forefront of this, and it has around 5% of the share of the market, same as Latin America. So I would like to focus on this region. I think that when it comes to Latin America, for example, we just don't have state actors, but we have NGOs like WIT, we have individuals, we have enterprises. So I'm really interested in highlight the roles that NGOs play in fostering growth and empowerment of especially women in these regions. And because I believe that not just specific stakeholders, not just specifically the state, has the power to do so.
Thank you. Having the approach of really, let's say, the positive aspect on what immersive technology can do, DG, in terms of the risks and also the challenges that we are facing, because I feel personally that we often tend to, let's say, have the conversation in a very optimistic way, however, do not address the things that we still need to change in the ecosystem actually to achieve that. So please, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much. And indeed, I think sometimes we tend to overlook what are some of the current challenges. Not going to focus too much on the policy challenges because some of them were already mentioned in previous panels, which were super interesting, by the way. I recommend if you were not here to go check it out on the website. And so I would like to summarize in 3 main challenges, but of course, welcome anyone from the audience or from my panelists to add more. One big one is connectivity. Second one is affordability, and the third one is usability. So first one is connectivity, meaning that sometimes we overlook the fact that there is a lot of work that needs to be done when it comes to discrepancies, both between different cities. There are cities and countries with way different broadband capacities and infrastructure in place, but also in more developed and advanced economies, there are a lot of the discrepancies between the urban areas and the rural areas, and this is a challenge that needs to be addressed in order to really get to the point and to really get to the point where we can really talk about immersive technologies for everyone, for all. Second one is affordability. We know that there is a huge gap when it comes to accessibility for devices and for platforms at the moment. So there is a big work that needs to be done there to try to close this gap and to make technologies affordable and usable by everyone. And the third one is usability, and this connects a bit to the skills and digital literacy, which is a challenge that you often hear, and it's really important to stress that out because we cannot reach mass adoption, we cannot have immersive technologies and the metaverse for all if there is a huge gap in skills and a huge gap in digital literacy. On how we can address these type of challenges, I will dive deep more afterwards, but I just wanted to set the scene with what, in my view, are 3 key challenges.
So we build up the interest and we will explore that further in the next 40 minutes. Good. Speaking still about, let's say, the theoretical aspect and also the almost, let's say, glance positivity that we sometimes have, from more a business perspective, I would be very interested to hear if, Jennifer, do you think there are already tangible business use cases of how really immersive tech acted as an enabler for empowerment, competitive advantage, and also both economic but also social growth in that sense?
Yeah, definitely. There, I would say, in terms of tangible impact areas, there are indirect and direct effects or contributors. But before I do that, I just want to emphasize everything that Gigi just said, because I feel it's so important. We can build the greatest technologies. If people can't access it, if they can't use it, it won't empower, it won't benefit. So I think these challenges around connectivity, digital literacy, usability, and affordability just need a lot more attention. So then coming back to impact areas, I want to talk a bit about maybe first indirect impact areas, and there we can talk about education. So immersive technology has this great potential to bring education to areas that might not have been able to access quality education in the past. And there are even voices around the fact that maybe Gen AI is now rendering the university degrees unnecessary. So I think the technology has just great potential to bringing like the specific teaching of the skills of the future to individuals and groups in emerging economies. And I could talk about this for longer, but there was this amazing talk by Monica Ares yesterday, and you can all watch it in the YouTube screen, and I would really do recommend you to do that in case you want to know more about how VR and XR can contribute to learning and to education. Then another indirect impact area is obviously health. And when we're talking about VR health, we're talking about services from remote consultation over re and upskilling up to remote surgeries. And also here, I want to not talk about it in large breath, but just tell you about an amazing woman that I've met at AWE today and yesterday. Her name is Dr. Dorothea Kaufmann, and she works in this field, and she's done incredibly impressive work. So if you can connect with her on that, I very much recommend you to do that too. And then lastly, one very important thing, of course, that will generate direct impact on emerging economies or for emerging economies is the entire idea of the creator economy that we already have, obviously, but recent research by Goldman Sachs is predicting the creator economy to almost double until 2027. So I think we'll see a growing potential in that space, and we do want everyone to benefit from that equally, not a few selected regions or areas in the world.
Following up on the shout-outs and, let's say, happenings of yours during AWE, during a guided tour of this conference, I also listened to somebody from Meta saying that apparently education enabled via VR is 4 times faster in terms of the learning experience. However, the obstacle which still prevents us to implement that in societies is also a behavioral and a structural change. So from an educational, institutional perspective, how to really shift the mindset of people, institutions, and key stakeholders to achieve that, but then also educate the beneficiaries of that. So in all of the use cases that you gave us, how would you see that this, let's say, behavioral, but also structural metrics in society display, and how can we bridge both the economic benefit with a real impact in societies accordingly? I know it's a big question, I'm sorry.
It is a big question. So let's say I wanted to talk about behavioral impact, but there's a key learning I had in the past days and also in the past months, and I think I really want to share that. In the era of social media, we've become, we all have this big need to sort of talk in headlines. And I think we need to stop doing that, especially when we're talking about the impact of technology on individuals. We're talking about headlines like VR is bad, VR is good, the metaverse is dead, the metaverse is alive. We need to kind of stop making these assumptions and talk about things in a more granular way. So when we're talking about how behavioral change can impact economic situation, I want to give you a very specific example. And I've actually, one note I need to take, I might have used these big headlines terms yesterday in a presentation, so feel free to just ignore those. So I want to give you a very specific example today, and that was done by a researcher. Her name is Ylva Hansdotter, and we worked with her in the frame of creating the World Economic Forum paper. And she built an immersive experiences with her team that is called Be Earth. And in this experience, you're not only seeing climate change, but you can embody climate change. You go through kind of a hero journey, and then you're able to be the hero of the story, and you're able to mitigate, I think, your water, and you're putting out a fire in a burning forest. And what she found afterwards is that the awareness or the willingness to engage in climate education was almost double as high after the experience than it was before. And then she asked participants what they did in terms of education a month after, and that's a finding that did also hold in the longer term. So I think tools like these can be very beneficial to empower economies, to empower certain mindsets, to empower empathy for things, to foster collaboration and conflict resolution. And I think VR can be a powerful tool for that or in that context.
I mean, perhaps, Elena, would you like to share some examples from women in immersive technology, how, let's say, the theoretical approach of what needs to be done in order to adjust and also to progress, what Jennifer just stated, could have occurred in some of your projects? I mean, I saw the presentation of Bad Earth Girls yesterday, still super impressed by it and totally overwhelmed by the strength of these young female entrepreneurs and really change makers. So please share more with us how even that adoption and that project just came to life and then celebrated such a tremendous success.
Yeah, first of all, I agree. It was incredible to see the girls sharing their stories. I would like to mention them, Natalia, Nadia, Amelia, Therese, Marta. They're incredible, and they're all under 20. So the underlying idea is to empower women by educating them. So they're going through a contest where they learn how to create their own space in the metaverse. So they untap their programming potential, but also their creative potential. And as in the talk they indicated yesterday, now they're creating their own company, which actually focuses on creating even more goods. So from a good impact, there's generating even more good impact because they're focusing on tackling fast fashion and fostering sustainability. My take on this is that what happens with women specifically, but I would say a lot of
Can I just jump in quickly?
Yeah.
Especially taking into account that all of those girls have been either from Poland, Latvia, or Albania. So really from ecosystems where we would not have that westernized approach towards education, also towards technology adaptation. So again, just an emphasis that you can do that cross countries, cross regions, and especially in places where you would not consider so.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's even more interesting to look at, even though it's still in Europe because we're with Europe. But for example, this could happen in other regions, and I think this is a very good example of how NGOs can empower, but also how individuals can empower. And looking to this example, I think what happens many times with women, and going back also to what you were saying on education, I think that many times it's not just about lacking the tools to empower women and girls technologically, financially, but it's a lot about mental barriers that are present. I just don't think in girls, but I think in a lot of groups that feel left out from society, and that the first problem is that you don't really feel like you can make an impact, and so you don't even access the tools that you have, if you have them, to make that impact. So you don't access financial or technical education if it's available. And so I think what these girls and this campaign stands for is a symbol for other women and for other people from other social groups to feel like they really have a power. They really can make their own space, not just in the metaverse, but really metaphorically, that everybody, even if they feel small, they can make the bigger change, like the butterfly effect, really. So this is my take, that mental barriers many times are the first ones that need to be taken down, and then we access the skills.
I mean, we have seen that also this program took place in terms of education on spatial.io. So each of the girls also received a VR headset, then, let's say, got the hands-on experience to really a deep dive and explore that further. So looking at those, let's say, pre-requirements for the program to actually happen and seeing it from a bigger scale, is it something that educational institutions in general are supposed to provide to really catch up with the status quo that we are? Is it the responsibility of governments to push that further for the emancipation, also the empowerment, not only of girls, but those regions in general? Or is it enterprise and the industry sector who is supposed to do that? Tackling that in the direction of, let's say, more the policy area and maybe putting a bit of a challenging questions on policy requirements and currently in place frameworks. Gigi, is there a future outlook that we are going to experience, or what's your take on that?
Yeah, I want to play a bit devil's advocate here as well, because I think many of the projects that we heard about are fantastic. The impact that they are having is super, but at the same time, it's still reserved for a tiny bit of the population, and there still is an enormous gap that needs to be filled if we really want to push this forward for emerging economies as well. Because at the end of the day, this technology will be amazing, fantastic, but if it's not usable and if it's not affordable by most of the population, then at the end of the day, what's the real impact? What's the concrete impact that we want to make? Societal impact.
So keyword accessibility once again.
Yes, especially on accessibility and affordability. I think there is still a lot of work to do. Who can do this work? It's another question. And I mean, I have a policy background, so of course my answer here is a little bit biased. But I think in general, it's not one single category that needs to act. It's gonna, like, we really need a collaborative effort, like a collective effort from governments, regulators, organizations, industry. And if we don't have that, then it's going to be really tricky to actually achieve. How, then, once we have this collaboration in place, how we can achieve that? I think through various policies, like regulatory policies or funding and financing. I think this could be a good start. They're not going to be able to solve everything and to close the gap immediately, but I think that they could give an head start to solve some of these issues. For example, when it comes to financing, SMEs and startups in developing countries. I'm thinking about, for example, on how there is a program called Digital Moonshot in Africa, where they created this fund of 25 billion just to support the digital transformation of emerging countries in Africa, and that's already having a big effect. For example, like that combined with the regulatory input from governments, also in Africa, is enabling an enormous growth in a sector which is the stablecoin sectors, which is part of, let's say, the Web3 area. And
they
now,
call it Web 4.0 now, just
or Web 4.0, whatever you want to call it, but the evolution of internet, how I like to reference it for clarity. And I think it's the evolution of the use of stable coins in Africa, especially for cross-border payments, has been incredibly supported by regulatory policies and funding, and it's already having a big effect. Is it already the final outcome? No, but it's helping and it's contributing to growth in that sector. Or I'm looking at also what's happening in Poland, for example. Previous panel talked a little bit about the regulation on cryptocurrencies. The regulation on cryptocurrencies created a framework that now it's attracting a lot of businesses in countries like Poland. And I think Poland is, if I'm not wrong, either the first or the second country where the most agencies and firms and companies are registering now for issuing cryptocurrencies and crypto assets because of this framework. So in this case, the EU was able to create something like a big policy that is concretely helping like a country like Poland. We can argue if it's an emerging economy or an emerged economy, but in general, it's a country that benefited from government policies and a regulatory framework as a whole. So I think, of course, are they going to be enough at the end of the day? Probably not, but they can really set the scene. And I think it's really important at this stage to set the scene, because if we don't, then we risk on wasting on an opportunity for these technologies to be accessible and affordable for everyone.
Yes. At the EIT, we also see the real, let's say, impact and output of this initiative in Poland. Due to an increase of startup creation, more and more, even, let's say, confidence arises within the population to really become an entrepreneur, to establish oneself in the scene, to also have a different approach, because especially economies with modest or moderate levels of innovation capacities also have this behavioral barrier to overcome. So once the policy really reflects on the impact for the people, then people adopt towards it, and then also net output of the country increases accordingly. So once we foster that, of course, it's first you have the policy, and then you have people, and then you also have the businesses. So that's the question, especially from, let's say, innovation and technology consultant background. Is this something that at Accenture you put a focus on, to take this, let's say, triangle into account that is really business, policy, and people? Or how do you display that, especially in your work also with the World Economic Forum on the anti-metaverse initiative?
Yeah, definitely. So one thing I want to briefly mention before I dive into that is, and it's linked to this as well, I think you talked about collaboration, right? And we need more collaboration, especially in the frame of creators, public sector, private sector, and academia, and we need actionable collaboration as well. And I think another thing that we need very much is reality checks as well. Like, coming back to what I talked about before and what we've mentioned briefly, like education. Like, there are studies that show we can't just put ed tech into some area and just like hope it'll work and then wave goodbye. But we need to have coherent policies in place. We need to have community involvement. We need to include stakeholders and upskill teachers. So there is a lot more to this in terms of collaboration and reality checking, like what are we really putting out there and is it really bringing benefit? So one thing that I'm looking into at Accenture quite a lot, or that we are looking into within the frame of the responsible metaverse team, is also the idea of designing technology responsibly. So
what does that mean, responsible technology design?
So we can look at this in a frame from the large breadth, actually. It covers a lot of areas, and there we can look into rights or ethical principles. So that could range from is the technology that we build, does it adhere? Is it not only privacy compliant, but does it go beyond? Is it transparent? Is it safe? And that's something we focused on in the metaverse paper. Like, what are the social implications in terms of safety, in terms of health and well-being? Is it sustainable and is it fair? So there are a lot of considerations that we need to walk through and that we need to have proper research on so we can act accordingly and then ingrain that into design. So one approach that we're taking there, and that also the TU Delft has established in the frame of responsible innovation, is this idea of identifying principles that a certain technology impacts, for example, fairness or transparency, then seeing like kind of thinking of unintended consequences, like what could go wrong with this technology, and then like looking into how do we need to mitigate what mechanisms.
Do you take, hype curves into account for that as well? Because if we consider the ecosystem over the past years and just, say, jumping back on the joke from Web 2 to Web 3 to Web, I think 5, I read yesterday night at LinkedIn by somebody as well.
No, please.
No, I literally,
Let's not
it was a lady from Dubai. She just said that she's now an advocate for Web 5.0. There I thought that I was prepared for today. Probably not. But anyways, in that sense that you say there was a happening of, let's say, you had the crypto strife, then all of a sudden NFTs, Web 3, then we changed from that to metaverse. Then all of a sudden everybody started talking about artificial intelligence. And in designing this responsible innovation approach, as you say, do you try to predict that, let's say evaluate what is really the impact being generated, but what is currently advocated or talked about on the market? Or how does that look, let's say, from a theory to practice?
Yeah, certainly we do, but like what I'm talking right now is really experience focused. So not only like a large breadth view, but really looking into how can we implement design principles and requirements for design into how we build technologies so they're equitable, so they're inclusive, so they're fair, so they don't harm people. So like what I personally do, and Accenture is huge, so there are a lot of different things happening in this space, but what I personally am looking into is like how can we make that happen? How can we make responsible technology happen within the ecosystem and enable our developers and people who really build the technology to do that responsibly? And obviously also our clients.
Nice. Giving the floor to Elena to keep the balance amongst all the speakers as well. How's your take on all of the happenings just discussed? From, let's say, also an NGO perspective, and then from an international relations one, of how to bridge society, humanity, and technology for an impact at large. Don't quote me on that as on paper.
I was just listening. I was just so amazed by all of these inputs, trying to put it all together, because now thinking of responsible technology, I had just this question in my mind, like, who is responsible? Like, are we responsible for technology, or is technology responsible for us? Like, cause
that's a big one.
No, because like sometimes I feel like I don't understand anymore. Maybe it's just me, but I don't understand anymore if we are driving the technological revolution, let's call it, or if technology is driving us. And that's very scary to think of, and that's why I'm so sort of obsessed with ethics, because I think the moment we use technology for good, the moment we use it for public good and to improve health and to improve education, that's us driving technological revolution. The moment that we have just technology advancing without us even trying to have a conversation about this, then this is technology driving us. And I'm not really sure that's something that's going to improve our lives, especially if we don't include everybody in the conversation. And I was very pleased not just about hearing about collaboration, but also hearing about education, and I would add public health. So because I think the main employment of technology should be public good, I think everybody that's involved in the public sphere should be involved, and everybody has different tools to add into the conversation and to bring positive change. So when it comes to businesses, there is corporate social responsibility. When it comes to NGOs, there are actions such as the campaign that we undertook, and I explained today. When it comes to states, there is policy making. In the EU, we have integration. We're bringing integration forward. But I was mentioning, for example, Latin America, because that is a region where there is great potential for immersive technology, but there is no regional integration is not as advanced as we are. And also historically, the state was not as reliable as it was in recent history here. So I think in those kind of regions, it's very important to also focus on the role that businesses or NGOs can play. And at the same time, the underlying call to action I would like to have is that all of these different stakeholders are simply made up by people. And the main actor that differentiates like history in the 20th century or 19th century from history from us that we're experiencing now is the role of the individual. So now the individual is really at the center of the international debate. We have human rights that are just about the individual. So it's really about us potentially making the difference with our behavior as policymakers, as us joining NGOs and getting involved in campaign. And when you were saying, yes, but this is an elitarian thing, yes, but when there are campaigns, when women empower themselves, I think that elite becomes a symbol for other women to feel like mentally they can do that and then can bring change forward. And that creates like a very, very big chain effect, I think. And I'm very hopeful toward this to happen.
No, I'm also hopeful, of course. we all are. So
I think we need to start somewhere, right?
Yes, exactly.
We do not start, and the progress is not going to be enabled for that. And just going back to what you said about, do we, let's say, control technology or control, or 3, 2, 1, technology controls us? I think that it applies in different industry and sectors equally. If you look at it from a more institutional lens, or if you look at it from an entrepreneurial and startup culture lens, we experienced that in our recently launched Deep Tech Talent Initiative that we evaluated 13 issue areas, what are supposed to be the future of tech. Startups matching, or let's say early stage innovators, matching into that system obviously have a higher likelihood of attracting funding and becoming more successful. So if I'm, as a early stage innovator or to be startup founder, then choose my mission according to the market and to what I have to gain, is that really the reason why I should launch a company? Just for that sense? So is it the technology that then dictates what I do for life, or is it really the reason why I once wanted to solve a problem? And this is something which is a reoccurring issue in the market that we see, through the fact that it runs on the speed of light, how a new form of, as I said before, terminology gets introduced from one end to another end, and then also forces individuals, that goes back to that, with a deep passion for the system, with the need to pivot in order to survive and to remain competitive. So there's the question, who is really in charge of regulating and also orchestrating that? But we're probably not going to solve this issue in 55 minutes today. On that end, I think that we could also open up the floor to the audience for some questions. And I already, that was quick, see a hand raised on the left side. And yes, please.
Hello. I have actually a question regarding the topic of this discussion panel. I was actually expecting maybe a bit more specific about the emerging economies. So maybe I'll follow up with one question, which is, what do we mean by emerging economies? And to explain just the background, from my understanding, I was born in one of these emerging economies. And for a long time, when I was trying to advocate for investors, partners, businesses to come and work with African economies. Oh, by the way, I'm actually a space tech and deep tech consultant for EUSPA, European Agency in the Space Program. I understood that we do not see often Africa as a market, while for more than 2 decades now, China, India, and as we call today the Global South, have been looking at Africa as a market. So, as you rightly say, we cannot solve everything in 55 minutes, but I don't think that EU or US or whatever can afford today to wait longer, because the metaverse is in the building over there. Fintech. I still have friends who do not know what M-Pesa is. M-Pesa is actually a peer-to-peer transaction between people that does not use internet. And we could have developed that in EU instead of having technology from richer countries to go to African or emerging economies. We could have it backward. So yeah, I'm going to cut it here. I think policy making in EU is doing great job, it will be great that we maybe connect closer to those who could benefit from it, and that we maybe, if I can put it broadly, stop waiting and go there, connect to local projects that are ongoing, because my personal belief is that we just can't afford to wait longer.
Who wants to go first?
I mean, I can make a point on that's a really important question and a great point that you raised. As I mentioned before, also on a similar example to what you just raised, of how great is the use of stable coins in Africa and how much it was favored also by policy and framework. I think we should take examples of that as well. But going back on the let's say on the point on cooperation, I totally agree with you. Sometimes yes, we tend to focus, especially. I'm also working, let's say, in the EU bubble. So that sometimes we tend to not go out of the bubble, and we should do it more often. And also in that context, I think, personal opinion, what could be really important is international cooperation. So not only like to see, okay, the EU, international organizations like OECD, ITU, and many the World Economic Forum, which you contributed to in a few papers, is doing a fantastic job on that. But there should be more. There should be more cooperation, because we really, otherwise we will end up in a silo. Yes, of course there are emerging economies also in Europe and also in the EU. But of course, like we should try to be as inclusive as possible, because otherwise, going back to the point that I made before, like the metaverse and immersive technologies will not be for all, but will be for just a tiny part. And yes, we can work on the EU level. Yes, we can achieve, let's say, a broader adoption in the EU and in Europe, but that's not enough. I totally agree with you on the point that this is just there needs to be more job when it comes to bringing it broadly as an issue. I don't know if you want to, if anyone wants to add.
I'm waiting for either Jennifer or Elena to perhaps jump in or wishing to add something.
Yeah, I mean, I really appreciate this question and also what Gigi said. I think that in general, when it comes to development theories as well, my inspiration for this panel was Esther Duflo, that's economist focusing on development economics, and she mainly realized that if women are left outside of the economy, it's much more likely that the economy will not develop, and she was focusing on development economies. So I think overall, to empower women economically, because right now our economy is becoming more and more tech-centered, it's first important to empower them technologically, and then economic development will follow. And this is mainly my takeaway. I think, on the other side, that sometimes accessibility is not just lacking on the side that countries that we would define as developing economies, but maybe it's lacking also on our side, that we sort of struggle to understand, to access the issues of other countries, or to access the understanding that other stakeholders have. So I really appreciate what the businesses are doing, what the states are doing. I don't think there's anyone that can do more. I just really think that indeed, if we collaborate more, we can really achieve more. And so I think this is really the main point. And if we also acknowledge the presence of certain parts of the population and certain parts of the world, and we empower them, and we give them the understanding that they are seen and valuable, this is just a start for something that can have a very, very long-term impact.
Yeah, but we need...
Sorry, you want to say something?
No, please.
I just wanted to play back the ball quickly for the question, because for people, let's say, not directly coming from Africa, or as you said, from an emerging economy, my question back to you actually would be, do you think it is something that should be done on a business level, so that companies really should work on that? Or do you call it a responsibility in terms of collaboration of governments and international institutions from a person having, let's say, a diversified angle of experience and also expertise in that area.
Thank you. I appreciate you asking that. And for the background, I lived half of my life in Europe, half of my life in Africa. I would think it should be a joint collaboration. The radical me a few years ago would have said, let's just let business doing business and then politics doing politics afterwards. But I realized that policy making should ideally come before the business making, but in practice, policy comes often after. Therefore, I would say, first of all, educating businesses in the fact that emerging economies might not be seen as business viable today, but in the near future they will be. We can see the trends in investment in India, not even mentioning China. In the future, there will be most of the African countries. And while we're doing that, I think that policymakers at institutional level could or should be, I think, have at least a bit more representation within their decision-making board, because without the empathy that it takes to see opportunities in these different regions, we might be drawing great regulation, great project that will not stand the challenge of reality. Plus, there is the funding part that is also missing.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
Thank you. Ramesh, I see you.
Thank you for the question. So it's kind of a follow-up question. I think skills training is something that could definitely help emerging economies. And just to give you an example, when I was in India a couple of months ago, there's a startup. They were training young kids, like 16, 17-year-old kids, to do spray painting using a headset. And because, spray painting, you could waste a lot of paint or mess up some important jobs, but they were training these, young kids, but they had like a state contract to do the training for the skills development for the government. And they were quite successful in doing the training. And then, of course, once they are trained to a certain level, then they will do the real job, right? So they won't be wasting paint or mess up some real, project. So, I mean, do you have any thoughts on like along those lines where skills training could be used for, Africa, India, wherever, and, the content could be developed, and it could be a factory in Europe, and they have this training, which is, just like YouTube, right? People watch YouTube and learn things, but I don't think spray painting, you need some coordination of your motor skills. So there, I think AR, VR technology could help.
I totally, fully agree with that, especially thinking about the opportunity of knowledge transfer through AR and VR. If we say that we train a group of engineers with a knowledge stack, which, let's say, has been built up in France, in India, for example, due to there is either a lack of that expertise. If you would calculate that in old terms, that would mean tremendous travel costs and hiring the staff, having people with them. So definitely considering it from a, let's say, economic approach of saying it also incentivizes a cost reduction and an efficiency increase. The only thing that I have to counteract is basically time difference. And I can even argue one further of saying that each, let's call it educational institutions, if we keep on the conversation about skills, each institution with their respective expertise or potential focus area can also have a joint collaboration to even create more value. So it's not about institution X and institution Y, but we create similar to joint programs to really have the value add and the value chain for the beneficiary at the end of the day. Doesn't matter if sitting in Vienna or if sitting in New Delhi at this point or if sitting in Warsaw. And once we achieve that, we also have a more, let's say, more equal opportunity access to education to really advance society. But I'm sure someone of you would like to add to that as well.
Yeah, I would like to add something because thanks for your question, Ramesh, and I agree with you. Some of the words, some of the use cases that you mentioned, so training, reskilling and skilling, and digital twinning are, let's say, going in the same umbrella term of industrial use cases of the metaverse, which arguably right now are the most developed and the most present ones. What I think, and they are fantastic use cases, they are already there. It's not something that we need to look for the future. It's not something that will be here in 5 years, 10 years. but it's something that's here already. But at the same time, some of these trainings, some of these programs are really cost intensive. So there needs to be some sort of way to facilitate this type of programs and this type of trainings in every country. And maybe to go back a little bit to how and who can support, I think the role of private partnership, public-private partnerships and governments with the financing and subsidies is really important in this area, because imagine healthcare facilities who would highly benefit from this type of equipments, but sometimes, of course, due to the cost and affordability, they are not able to. So broad programs and intense programs with clear targets and uptake measures when it comes to giving access to these technologies to healthcare facilities or educational facilities as well, it's super important. Otherwise, it's going to take more time. And it's a pity because these technologies are already here. So it's a pity that they will need more time to get there. If we can really make a strong push now, I think it would be great. And that needs to come both from industry and governments, policymakers through public-private partnership, but also broadly. I think it is a responsibility also specifically on government as well.
And I would actually like to add something on a more technical approach, and like kind of painting the picture of a future vision here, especially when we're talking immersive technology that is enabled by AI. When we're talking about upskilling, reskilling, like education on a global level, depending on people's cultural context, they might learn differently. They might be used to different learning methods and might react differently to certain learning assets. So I think Gen AI will give us this great opportunity to tailor education and skilling to people's individual needs in the future. At least that's a hope that I have that will happen. So I think that's another factor that just outlines the great potential of the technology in that area.
I think taking into account time as well, we now may jump into the word which you just used, vision. So to wrap it up, just in one sentence or one statement, I would like to invite you to summarize, first of all, why it is so important to have this Discord, how your vision for the future displays into that, and what's the pathway for, let's say, enablement for you towards that.
I think technology is coming so close to us. So what we need is collaboration, as we've said it a million times. We need collaboration, and we need people willing to listen and to learn and to adjust accordingly. Another thing that we need, and there's a definition of responsible innovation that I really like, and it's taking care of the present through collective stewardship of science and innovation in the future. Taking care of the future through collective stewardship of science and innovation in the present. That's how it goes. And I think that's just my vision, that we'll invest more in doing that and building responsible technology that does not only benefit a few selected groups or people, but can benefit the entire globe and people around the entire globe.
That was more than a sentence.
I'm sorry.
I wanted to say something, but I refused. But I mean, it was very much value delivered, so I think that we can make an agreement and a compromise that it was okay.
And also very much aligned with what I was going to say, so I think we can merge your sentence and my sentence, and we skip and we go directly to Elena.
Are you sure?
Yes, I'm sure.
Okay. My sentence is like a correlation. Like for me, more technological empowerment, especially for women, leads to more economic empowerment for women, which leads to more economic development. Regarding emerging economies, I think it's very important that being represented is not just random thought. It's that we need to improve institutions. We're in Vienna, there is the UN here. We've been thinking for a long, long time of a reform of the UN with the emerging economies being more represented. So we need to action with this kind of reforms, I think.
I think that's a perfect statement to close the session for today. Thank you so much to, of course, the panelists and also to the audience. And I would give the floor back to our lovely hostess.
Thank you so much, guys.